Before you is stone, cold, dense, motionless. But your eyes do not see stone. They see a transparent veil, delicate folds, soft fabric that seems ready to tremble from the slightest breath. And this is where the strangest part begins. It is not silk, not plaster, not a modern imitation. It is marble. How did the masters of the past manage to create something like this without lasers, without machines, without computer models? Why do these sculptures look as if they violate the very laws of material? And why are there so few works like this in the world if the secret was supposedly known? Today, we will examine one of the boldest illusions in the history of art: marble veils. Beauty? Yes, but behind this beauty hides a far more uncomfortable question. What exactly did sculptors of the 18th and 19th centuries know if they could turn stone into almost transparent matter? Watch until the end. This will make you look differently not only at these sculptures, but also at the very idea of the impossible in the art of the past. But the uncomfortable truth does not begin in the salons of the 18th century or in the workshops of European virtuosos. The roots of this stone deception go much deeper, to the place where official art history usually speaks in a calm museum voice. Ancient Greece, classical sculpture, the cult of the ideal body. Yet behind these polished words stands a hard fact. Ancient masters had already learned how to turn fabric into something more than decoration. In their hands, clothing did not hide the figure. It exposed its form with almost provocative precision. A Greek sculptor did not simply carve folds. He created the illusion of wet fabric clinging to the body, repeating muscles, curves, tension, and movement. Later, this method would be known as the wet drapery technique. The name sounds soft, almost harmless, but the idea itself was bold: to make the viewer see a living form beneath a stone garment. Not a rough cloak, not a heavy cover, but a thin shell that seemed to cling to the skin. This refers to the ancient foundation of the marble veil. First, masters learned how to show the body beneath fabric, and only later did other eras push this effect toward almost impossible transparency. This manner became especially powerful during the classical period, around the 5th century BC. One only has to look at Greek reliefs, temple sculpture, and figures of goddesses where drapery seems not carved but thrown over the body a second before the viewer looks at it. Motion appears inside stone. Air appears inside folds. A still figure begins to carry the deceptive feeling of breath. Is that not a direct blow to the usual idea of ancient craft? And here is the main point. The ancient wet drapery technique was not yet the same marble veil that would later astonish Europe. It was the foundation, the first technical and artistic challenge. Greek masters were not trying to make the veil literally transparent. They were doing something more dangerous, training the eye to believe that stone could imitate soft matter, and that fabric in sculpture could behave like real cloth. This refers to a method where illusion is built not on miracle, but on exact calculation. The thickness of a fold, the depth of a shadow, the line of a hip, the tilt of a shoulder, the tension of fabric. In ancient sculpture, there were no random folds. Every line served the image. If fabric clung to a knee, the viewer saw movement. If a fold gathered at the waist, tension appeared. If drapery lay across the chest or shoulder, stone began to argue with its own nature. A heavy material suddenly represented lightness, and a cold surface suggested living plasticity. That is why the story of marble veils cannot begin only with Corradini, Sammartino, or Monti. They became the loud names of a later era, but the idea itself was born earlier. Antiquity gave the formula. Fabric in sculpture must not conceal, but reveal. And that formula survived centuries, moving from temples to workshops, from mythological figures to funerary monuments and religious compositions. This refers to the chain of transmitted mastery. The ancient method did not vanish completely. It changed shape, disappeared, returned, and each time became more daring. The so-called wet drapery technique was the first major step toward the effect later known as the marble veil. First came the body beneath drapery. Then came the face beneath the thinnest stone fabric. Then came the illusion so strong that the viewer could no longer understand where sculpture ended and visual deception began. And the sharpest question remains the same. If the beginning of this technology reaches back to ancient Greece, how much did the masters of the past truly know? And how much of that knowledge was lost on the road to our time? And then a man steps onto the scene who turned an old ancient method into a true scandal in stone. Not an academy, not a nameless school, not some vague tradition of masters, but a specific name. Antonio Corradini, a Venetian sculptor of the early 18th century. He made the marble veil not merely a beautiful effect, but a spectacular challenge to common sense. Before him, fabric on stone bodies had already been shown, folds had been carved, figures beneath drapery had been displayed. But Corradini went further. He forced the viewer to believe that this was not carved marble, but a thin curtain hiding a living face. The early 18th century was a time when Europe adored luxury, symbols, theatricality, and expensive gestures. Venice still carried the reputation of a city of masks, intrigues, ceremonies, and cold beauty. And from this environment came a master who took heavy stone and turned it into an almost transparent shell. Beautiful? Yes, but more importantly, audacious. It was as if the sculptor deliberately challenged the viewer. Look, you know this is marble, yet you still see fabric. This refers to the moment when an artistic device stops being a craft detail and becomes a loud statement. Stone can deceive the eye no less powerfully than painted illusion. The effect became truly famous thanks to the sculpture Chastity. And here the story is no longer just about art, but about commission, money, memory, and personal tragedy. The work was commissioned by Prince Raimondo di Sangro, not an ordinary man, but an influential and educated figure surrounded by rumors. The sculpture was intended as a funerary monument to his mother, who passed away during childbirth. That is why the image of a veiled woman immediately receives a double meaning: memory, grief, status, and a cold victory of mastery over material. Corradini does not choose the obvious path. He does not create an ordinary figure under a rough covering. He creates an image in which all the force lies on the surface. The face is hidden, yet readable. The body is covered, yet suggested. A veil should conceal, but in Corradini's hands it does the opposite. It reveals everything beneath it. Is that not a daring move for an 18th century funerary monument? This refers to the main visual blow of Chastity. The viewer sees not simply a woman beneath a covering, but stone behaving like the finest material. What matters here is not only the technique, but the idea itself. The title, Chastity, demands restraint, closure, almost silence. Yet the sculpture works through paradox. The more the figure is covered by the veil, the stronger it attracts the gaze. The stone fabric becomes a provocation. It does not shout, wave its hands, or beg for attention. It does something more dangerous. It remains silent so expressively that it is impossible to look away. That is why Corradini came to be regarded as the father of the marble veil effect in European sculpture. Not because he was the first person in history to show fabric on a body. No, that had been known long before him. His role was different. He pushed the method to the point where the veil became an independent mystery, the main subject of conversation, almost an accusation against ordinary logic. How can one look at stone and see transparency? How can one touch marble with the eyes and feel the softness of cloth? This refers to the birth of a new artistic symbol. The marble veil became not an ornament of the figure, but proof of almost impossible mastery. In art history, people often like to smooth the edges and speak in noble phrases: tradition, plasticity, virtuosity, Baroque expressiveness. But behind these respectable formulas stands something harder. Corradini created an effect that struck the viewer instantly, without long explanations, without lectures, without giving indifference a chance. A figure stood before the viewer, and the stone over its face looked so thin that the very thought of marble seemed like a mistake. That is how the marble veil received a name, an author, and a point of explosion. Ancient wet drapery gave the foundation, but Corradini turned it into an 18th century sensation. And it all began not with a laboratory, not with a machine, not with modern optics, but with a master's hand, rare calculation, and Prince Raimondo's commission in memory of a woman whose fate became the reason for one of Europe's most provocative stone images. Now the focus must shift from Corradini's biography to the sculpture itself, because this is where the main strike against common sense begins. Before us stands a female figure covered with marble fabric, yet that fabric behaves as if it was not carved from stone, but gently lowered over the face and body. The veil does not lie like a heavy slab. It flows, wraps around the features, catches on folds, emphasizes contours, and creates a dangerous feeling. One more moment, and it could be lifted by hand. This is the provocation of chastity. The sculpture appears to speak of restraint, modesty, and distance, but the viewer sees the opposite. The covering does not hide the figure, it makes it even more visible. The face is concealed, yet the features can be read. The body is covered, yet the form comes through. Stone was supposed to create a boundary. Instead, it becomes a transparent suggestion. This refers to the strongest effect of the marble veil. By covering the figure, the master actually reveals it more sharply. Corradini does not work with rough mass, but with the finest surface. There is no sense of random drapery here. Every fold seems calculated in advance. Where to place shadow, where to leave light, where to sharpen a curve, and where to almost dissolve a line. The marble fabric passes over the face in such a way that the viewer sees not merely stone, but the illusion of breath beneath a covering. And this is not gentle museum beauty. It is cold, exact, almost severe calculation by a master who understood that one wrong millimeter could destroy the entire deception. The idea of transparency itself looks especially audacious. Real marble is not transparent. It is dense, heavy, and stubborn. But Corradini forces it to appear otherwise. He makes stone pretend to be fabric, and fabric almost pretend to be air. As a result, the viewer is trapped. The eyes see light material. The mind knows it is a stone surface, and a tense argument begins between the two. This refers to that rare case when sculpture works not only through beauty, but through direct deception of perception. Chastity became famous not because it showed a female figure. European art had enough such images, and not because the composition included a veil. Coverings, cloaks, and draperies had been carved by masters for centuries. The true sensation was something else. Corradini turned the veil into the main character of the work. Not the face, not the pose, not the overall silhouette, but the marble fabric itself became the object of admiration and disbelief. Here the calm phrase, "masterful work," is not enough. It is too weak. What stands before us is a demonstration of power over material. The sculptor takes stone, the most stubborn material for soft illusions, and forces it to perform the role of matter that should be thin, mobile, and almost weightless. It is as if he says to every future sculptor, "You want to astonish people, try repeating this by hand." This refers to the birth of a separate direction where the main mystery is not in the subject, but in the question, how is this even possible? After chastity, Corradini could no longer be seen merely as a good master with one successful work. His name became tied to the marble veil effect because he gave the method a recognizable image and a powerful impact. He showed that a covering could be not a secondary detail, but the central proof of mastery. And if fabric in sculpture had once served the body, here the opposite happens. The body serves the veil. That is how Corradini secured his place as the originator of this effect in the European tradition. Not because no one before him knew how to work with drapery, but because he raised an old method to the level of an almost impossible illusion. Chastity became not merely a monument, not merely a beautiful figure, not merely an ornament of a chapel. It became a challenge in stone. This is marble before you, but try convincing your own eyes of that. Corradini did not stop after one loud effect. After Chastity, he continued working with veiled figures, as if testing the same dangerous question again and again. How far can one go before stone stops looking like stone? For an ordinary master, drapery would have been decoration. For Corradini, it became a territory of risk, where every fold could either create a marvel or instantly expose the rough heaviness of the material. That is why his name became tied not simply to sculpture, but to a demonstration of the impossible. Corradini's veil was not just fabric placed on a figure. It was a test for the eye. It hid the face, yet forced the viewer to look more closely. It covered the form, yet made it more tangible. What is that, if not the coldest and most precise deception carried out with no room for error? This refers to the mature period of the master. The marble veil effect stopped being a single discovery and became his recognizable artistic signature. But ahead of him stood a work far more dangerous than an elegant female figure beneath a covering. Prince Raimondo di Sangro appears in this story once again, and once again not as a simple patron. For the San Severo Chapel in Naples, he planned a work that was meant to strike the viewer not with salon beauty, but with almost physical tension. The subject was Christ Veiled, an image in which marble had to show not a light veil over a face, but an entire body covered with the thinnest stone cloth. The stakes here were extremely high. It is one thing to reveal facial features beneath a veil. It is entirely different to cover a body with a marble shroud so that muscles, chest, arms, legs, lines of tension and rest can still be read beneath it. This is no longer just sculptural virtuosity. It is a challenge to material, anatomy, religious image, and the master's own reputation. How can cloth be shown resting on a body without destroying its form? How can stone be made thin without breaking it? This refers to a new level of the task. Now the marble veil had to work not as a detail, but as the entire dramatic shell of the work. Corradini began this idea, but the story broke off sharply. The master did not manage to bring the work to its final form. And this is where the second major figure enters the line. Giuseppe Sammartino. Not merely a successor, not a quiet executor of another man's will, but a man who received an almost impossible mission: to step into an idea already charged with expectation and make the final version powerful enough for his own name to remain in history. The situation was severe. The patron was Prince Raimondo. The place was the San Severo Chapel, a space where every work had to speak louder than ordinary church sculpture. The subject was Christ under a shroud. The predecessor was Corradini, already famous as a master of the marble veil. Any weakness here would look like failure. Any crude fold would destroy the whole idea. Any wrong turn of the chisel would turn the delicate shroud into a stone blanket. This refers to the moment of transferred mastery. One hand set the direction, but another had to prove it could withstand the terrifying height of the idea. Sammartino entered this story neither from nowhere nor with an easy task. He had to do more than copy Corradini. He had to surpass the expectation Corradini had already created. The public already knew that a marble veil could deceive the viewer. Now something greater was required. Not merely to deceive the eye, but to make stone cloth lie over a body in such a way that the viewer could feel silence, the weight of the moment, and the incredible thinness of the surface. That is how the story of the marble veil took a sharp turn. Corradini gave the effect its European fame, created its recognizable language, and raised the veil to the status of an artistic sensation. But the master's last great concept passed into the hands of Sammartino, and this transition made the story even louder. One master opened the door, while the other had to pass through it and prove that stone fabric could become not just an ornament, but the central shock of the entire composition. Christ veiled is no longer just a veil effect. This is the moment when marble fabric stops being a decorative device and becomes the main blow of the entire composition. Before the viewer is not a figure lightly covered with cloth, not an elegant female head under thin material, but the lying body of Christ fully covered by a shroud. And the most dangerous thing here is that the stone does not look like stone. It behaves like fabric that has just fallen over the face, chest, arms and legs. The work was completed by Giuseppe Sammartino in the year 1753 for the San Severo Chapel in Naples. A dry date? Only at first glance. Behind that date stands one of the boldest sculptural operations of the 18th century. The master had to show not merely a religious image, but the thin boundary between the stillness of the body and the living illusion of cloth. The shroud does not hide the form, it betrays it. Beneath it, the face, nose, lips, chest, muscular tension, and the lines of the arms and legs can still be read. This refers to Sammartino's main deception. The cloth seems to cover the body, yet through it, the viewer sees everything that matters. The sculptor could have taken the easy road, carve a heavy cover, close the figure with a dense mass, hide anatomy behind conventional drapery. But then there would be no scandalous force, no almost disturbing precision that made the work famous. Sammartino chooses another path. He makes the shroud appear so thin that it seems damp, soft, almost transparent. Yet before us is still marble. Dense, cold, stubborn material that does not forgive a weak hand. The face works with particular force. It is calm, almost detached, yet it does not disappear beneath the cloth. The stone shroud lies over it in such a way that the features remain readable, as if the material is not covering them, but repeating every line. There is no crude theatricality here. There is something else, cold precision that feels unsettling. The veil is not merely beautiful. It looks like evidence. The master knew how to force a hard surface to imitate thin matter down to the final curve. This refers to the rare effect in which the viewer sees two layers at once, the religious subject and the technical impossibility. The chest beneath the shroud does not seem like a flat stone shape, but like a body over which fabric has settled with natural weight. The arms and legs are readable through the folds without crude pressure. The muscles are not pushed forward artificially, yet they are there. The lines do not shout, they emerge. That is why this work strikes harder than ordinary virtuosity. It does not ask for admiration, it confronts the viewer with a fact. In the 18th century, a human hand made marble look thinner than real cloth. And here the uncomfortable question returns. What exactly do we call handwork when the result has such precision? This is not merely chisel, hammer, and patience. This is mathematical calculation of thickness, understanding of light and shadow, knowledge of anatomy, and a flawless sense of surface. 1 extra millimeter, and the fabric would become heavy. 1 cut too deep, and a crude hollow would appear. 1 wrong transition, and the entire illusion would collapse before the eyes. This refers to the highest level of the marble veil. Here, the master is no longer decorating the figure, but building the entire meaning of the work on the thinness of stone cloth. It is no surprise that Christ Veiled became the jewel of Sammartino's career, not because it is simply a famous religious sculpture, and not because it stands in a famous chapel. The main reason is harder and more honest. In this work, the viewer sees the limit of human control over material. Marble does not resist here. It is subdued so completely that the master seems to have forced it to forget its own nature. That is how the marble veil effect reached its summit. With Corradini, it was a challenge through a covered face and a female image. With Sammartino, it became an entire scene, where the thinnest shroud turns into the central witness of mastery. And the longer one looks at this sculpture, the stronger one question becomes: if this was made by hand in the year 1753, where is the real border between art, technique, and the impossible? After Corradini and Sammartino, a strange pause begins. Not a short one, not an accidental one, not something that looks like an ordinary change of taste. For almost an entire century, the marble veil seems to move into the shadows. The technique that had just proved the impossible suddenly stops speaking so loudly. Europe continues to build, commission monuments, decorate palaces, argue about style and grandeur, yet this thinnest stone fabric almost disappears from the front line. And here comes the uncomfortable question: how could a technique of such a level almost dissolve? This was not a small decorative trick, not a random fold on a cloak, not a simple workshop habit. This was a method that required rare material, merciless calculation, and an eye capable of seeing future transparency inside a heavy block. Something like that is not forgotten simply because fashion turns in another direction. Or perhaps it is forgotten if the masters, the school, the patrons, and access to the right stone all vanish together. This refers to the most disturbing point in the whole story. Great mastery does not always disappear loudly. Sometimes it simply falls out of practice until new generations no longer understand how it was done. After the loud impact of Chastity and Christ Veiled, the marble veil should have become an object of mass imitation. Sculptors, it would seem, should have rushed to repeat the effect. Wealthy patrons should have demanded such figures for chapels, palaces, and funerary monuments. Workshops should have guarded the method as a precious professional secret. But reality was harsher. Works of this kind remained rare. Too rare for a technique that could bring an artist fame, money, and a place in history. So the matter was not only beauty, and not only talent. The marble veil demanded the coincidence of several conditions at once. A master with insane precision of hand, a patron with expensive ambition, the right stone, and a time when viewers were ready to pay for such audacity. If one element fell away, the whole chain broke. Stone became stone again, and fabric returned to ordinary drapery. This refers to the rarity of the effect itself. The marble veil was not a mass movement, but an expensive, risky, almost one-of-a-kind operation. And yet such methods do not vanish forever. They remain in history like a dangerous blueprint, apparently forgotten, but too powerful to disappear completely. At the beginning of the 19th century, Europe once again began looking at the past with hunger. Antiquity, romantic longing, the cult of ruins, interest in old techniques, the desire to astonish the public, all of this gave the marble veil a chance at a new life. But simple repetition was no longer enough. A man was needed who would not merely remember the trick, but turn it into his own weapon. That man was Raffaele Monti, and his appearance in this story does not look like a calm continuation of tradition, but like the sharp return of a forgotten challenge. After an almost century-long pause, a master steps onto the stage, as if saying, "Did you think the stone veil remained in the past? No, it can be made even thinner, even more striking, even more dangerous for the eye." Where earlier masters had shown a marvel, Monti was preparing to create a recognizable signature. This refers to a new stage. In the 19th century, the marble veil returns not as a single sensation, but as the central motif of a master. Monti appears at a moment when the public wants not just beauty, but spectacle. It wants not calm forms, but an effect before which a person stops and argues with himself. Stone or fabric, surface or transparency, craft or an almost impossible trick. This was exactly the ground on which veiled sculptures could return. The old method received a new market, a new stage, and a new performer. And if Corradini gave the marble veil its European name, and Sammartino brought it to its religious and technical summit, then Raffaele Monti became the one who returned it to loud public attention. He did not simply pull a forgotten tool out of the past. He turned it into his own formula for success. After a long silence, the marble veil spoke again. Sharply, defiantly, and now in the voice of the 19th century. Raffaele Monti did not appear out of nowhere, like some accidental talent who simply happened to catch a successful motif. No, his path began in an environment where stone was not an abstract material from textbooks, but daily labor, family craft, and almost professional air. His father, Gaetano Matteo Monti, was also a sculptor. That means the future master saw from an early age not the romantic legend of art, but the heavy, dusty, stubborn side of the profession. His father became his first teacher. This is an important detail that should not be buried in one dry line. In a sculptor's workshop, one learns not only how to hold a tool, one learns to look at stone as if a form already exists inside it, waiting not to be invented, but pulled out. For Monti, this was not a late hobby and not a fashionable whim, but the environment in which his hand, eye, and character were formed. This refers to the main explanation of his later audacity. Monti entered art not as an amateur, but as a man prepared from childhood for a fight with material. Already at the age of 20, Raffaele Monti received his first gold medal at an exhibition. In an ordinary biography, this sounds like a pleasant fact. But in a newspaper-style reading, it means something sharper. This was an early signal that the master came out of the shadow of apprenticeship too quickly. At an age when many were still searching for their own voice, he had already received public recognition. That means his technique, ambition, and confidence had been noticed early. A gold medal is not just a bright award on a wall, it is a pass into the circle where an artist begins to be taken seriously. After such success, a name stops being merely a surname inside a workshop. It begins to work as a mark of quality. Orders, conversations, public interest, and the attention of those looking not for an ordinary craftsman, but for a master with an effect, begin to gather around it. This refers to the moment when private schooling turns into public reputation. Monti is no longer simply the son of a sculptor, but an independent contender for European recognition. Then his name begins to sound beyond his native environment. He becomes known in Hungary, Austria, and England. This is no longer a local story, not a small success inside one city, not the modest career of a provincial master. Monti steps onto the European stage where the viewer is harsher, the patron richer, the competition colder, and every mistake more expensive. And it was there that he had to prove he could do more than repeat other people's methods. He had to bring an effect that would be remembered. This is how the master was formed, who would later be capable of bringing the marble veil back from an almost forgotten arsenal. He knew the academic foundation, understood the craft from the inside, gained recognition early, and managed to work successfully in several countries. This is not the portrait of a random dreamer. It is the portrait of a man who understood that the public wanted not explanations, but impact. It wanted to see a work before which argument became useless. This refers to Monti's European success. His career was built not around one lucky accident, but around lasting recognition and the ability to make an impression. The contrast in this biography is especially important. On one side, family schooling, discipline, early training, and hard craft. On the other, an exhibition medal, international attention, and success in different countries. Monti combined old workshop discipline with the new public appetite for spectacle. Exactly such a man could take an old effect and turn it into his own signature. So when the conversation turns to Monti's marble veils, it is impossible to speak as if this were only a beautiful trick. Behind that trick stood a biography built on preparation, recognition, and cold professional calculation. He did not become the man who returned the technique to loud circulation by accident. He had schooling, ambition, and a European stage where the stone veil could once again become a sensation. Raffaele Monti's fame was not built around dozens of scattered subjects, but around one motif that he pushed to an almost provocative intensity. A woman beneath a veil. That was the image that made his name recognizable. Not a battle scene, not a grand monument, not a political commission, but a face hidden beneath the thinnest stone fabric. And that was the special audacity of it. The master took the quietest image and turned it into a spectacle from which it is difficult to look away. His vestals became the very case in which marble stopped being only material. Before the viewer is not simply a female head, not simply a classical profile, not simply a neat academic work. Before him stands a stone riddle. The veil lies across the face so thinly that it seems not as if a chisel passed over the surface, but as if a real piece of fabric gently settled on skin. The nose, lips, line of the chin, and curve of the cheeks are visible. Yet all of it seems to exist behind the finest barrier, one the viewer wants to lift just to check whether the eyes are being deceived. This refers to Monti's main motif. He did not simply depict women beneath a covering. He turned the covering itself into the center of the sculptural blow. What is especially dangerous in these works is that the veil seems movable. Stone should be still, final, fixed in its form. But in Monti's hands it behaves differently. The folds seem slightly stretched, the edges of the fabric appear ready to tremble. The surface looks so thin that the viewer involuntarily waits for motion. It is not the statue that watches the person. It is the person who begins to wait for the stone fabric to react to the air. This is where the very effect appears for which Monti became famous. His sculptures are not simply beautiful, they boldly argue with the sense of reality. We know that marble cannot flutter. We understand that it cannot shift from a light breeze. But the eye still sees exactly that. The veil is about to tremble. The edge will rise a little, and the hidden face will finally be revealed. This refers to a rare type of illusion in which mastery works not through loudness, but through tense expectation. Monti repeated the motif of women beneath veils not because his imagination was poor. It was his weapon, his recognizable mark, his cold professional bet. The same image allowed him again and again to prove the main thing. Marble can be forced to play the role of matter that is opposite to it by nature. The female face beneath a covering became an arena where heavy stone pretended to be soft fabric, and the precise hand of the master turned stillness into an almost living suggestion. The most famous among these images were the vestals, and this was not an accidental choice. A vestal is a strict, closed figure, connected with purity, service, and sacred fire. Such an image does not need a noisy pose or crude theatricality. On the contrary, it demands restraint. But Monti uses that restraint as a trap. The calmer the face, the quieter the image, the stronger the marble veil works. This refers to the paradox of his fame. Outwardly, the sculptures seem quiet, but inside them lies a powerful visual provocation. Monti's veil does not merely cover the head. It changes the entire meaning of the face. Without it, before us would be a beautiful female sculpture in an antique spirit. With it, there is already a mystery. The face seems close, yet inaccessible. The features are visible, yet covered. The image is understandable, yet never fully revealed. That very incompleteness gives the work its force. The viewer is not given full access. He is forced to look longer. In this sense, Monti was not only a master of the chisel, but a master of attention. He understood a simple, almost newspaper-like truth. What grips most strongly is not what is shown completely, but what is hidden halfway. His marble vestals work exactly like that. They do not shout about mystery, they silently demonstrate it. They do not ask for explanations, they place a person before an impossible fact. Stone can look as if it might be moved by a faint breath. That is how Monti's main motif became his calling card. Women beneath veils brought him fame, not because the public had never seen female images before. The public had seen them for centuries, but here it saw something else. Thin stone fabric that seems alive, and a face that appears hidden not in marble, but behind real material. That is why Monti's vestals became not simply beautiful sculptures, but loud proof that illusion can sometimes be stronger than the material itself. To understand why Monti returned again and again to the image of the vestals, the museum dust has to be removed from the word. A vestal was not merely a beautiful girl from the ancient world, convenient to place beneath a veil for an elegant effect. In ancient Rome, this image carried far heavier meaning. Behind it stood cult, discipline, sacred fire, civic anxiety, and an almost iron idea of purity. At the center of this image was the goddess Vesta. She was considered the protector of the household hearth, family order, and sacred flame. For the Romans, the fire of Vesta was not a charming domestic detail, but a sign of the stability of the entire city. As long as that fire burned, Rome seemed to preserve its right to strength, order, and the future. An extinguished flame was not seen as a small accident, but as a disturbing sign. This refers to the very meaning of the image. A vestal was not an ornament of the temple, but a living symbol of Roman stability. The priestesses of Vesta were not chosen for a pretty legend. Their lives were tied to rules, prohibitions, and high responsibility. The vestals had to guard the sacred fire, take part in rituals, and remain the face of strict Roman virtue. Their image combined youth, reserve, sacred duty, and cold inaccessibility. That is why such a figure was ideally suited to the marble veil. She was already, by her very nature, an image of mystery, prohibition, and inattention. For Monti, the vestal was a discovery. A woman beneath a veil could simply be a beautiful figure. But a vestal beneath a veil was no longer just beauty. It was a hint of ritual, ancient discipline, and a closed world into which an ordinary person was not allowed to enter. The marble fabric here is not an accidental detail. It strengthens the idea itself. The face is visible, yet distant. The features can be read, yet access is denied. The image is near, but it does not belong to the viewer. This refers to the artistic strength of the motif. The stricter the cultural meaning of the figure, the stronger the effect of the closed veil becomes. In the Roman imagination, Vesta was connected not with loud war and not with crude power, but with what holds the house and the city together from within. Hearth, family, sacred flame. These words sound soft, but in the ancient world they carried severe logic. A house without fire was an empty shell. A city without a sacred center was an anxious organism. That is why a servant of Vesta was perceived not as an ordinary young woman, but as part of a large ritual mechanism. This is why Monti did not need to add extra drama to the vestals. The drama was already inside the image. It was enough to cover the face with thin marble fabric, and the meaning became denser. The veil turned not merely into an effect of skill, but into a sign of distance. Before us is not the portrait of a society beauty, not a salon toy, and not an empty decorative head. Before us is a figure behind which an ancient cult stands. This refers to the case in which historical context makes the sculpture heavier in meaning, even when the veil itself appears weightless. That is exactly why the image of the vestal worked so powerfully in Monti's hands. It gave the master the perfect combination: a face that could be shown through fabric, reserve that could be emphasized, ancient authority that immediately made the sculpture more serious. The veil did not conflict with the theme, it struck directly into its center. It said in the language of stone the same thing that the Roman cult said in the language of ritual. Not everything before you is open, not everything is accessible, not everything may be touched by the gaze without consequence. The Vestals were young women who served in the temple of Vesta. But for art, they became more than a historical note. They turned into a convenient and powerful symbol of hidden purity, ritual silence, and strict beauty. Monti understood this without mistake. His marble veil on the Vestals worked not only as a technical marvel, but also as a lock of meaning. The thinner the fabric seemed, the stronger the inaccessibility of the image became. That is how the ancient cult gave the marble veil additional force. Without Vesta and the Vestals, these would simply be faces beneath coverings. Beautiful, delicate, masterful, but still only faces. With the ancient Roman meaning, however, they turned into figures in which stone, religion, prohibition, and illusion met in one cold blow. And that is why Monti's choice was not a random decoration, but a precise strike into the most sensitive point of the image. And now we finally reach the point where the whole story of marble veils stops being merely a beautiful legend. Monti did not only create sculptures before which viewers lost confidence in their own eyes. He also revealed the main secret. Not mysticism, not alchemy, not a fairy tale about the miraculous hand of genius, but a concrete technological clue. Such works used a special two-layered marble. At first glance, this may sound almost disappointing, as if the entire mystery comes down to a successfully found stone. But this is exactly where the harsh truth begins. The right marble was not an ordinary block from the nearest quarry. It was a rare material with layers of different density. The upper layer was softer, more responsive, more delicate. The lower one was denser, stronger, more stable. And only with such a combination could a master attempt to create the effect in which the stone above begins to look like fabric. This refers to the real technical core of the marble veil. The illusion was born not only in the sculptor's hand, but also in the very structure of the stone. The upper layer of marble became the future veil. It had to be reduced, weakened, refined, and brought to an almost dangerous thinness. Not roughly, not sharply, not with a safety margin. Millimeter by millimeter, until the surface began to play with light as if it were not stone, but transparent matter. The lower layer remained the foundation. From it came the face, the body, the features, the objects, everything that had to appear beneath the stone fabric. But two-layered marble by itself guaranteed nothing. The stone could offer a chance, but it did not do the work for the master. If the hand was weak, the effect disappeared. If the calculation was wrong, the veil became heavy. If the layer was removed too boldly, the surface could break, crack, or lose the necessary play of light. That is why such sculptures cannot be explained with one lazy phrase. They found unusual material. No, the material was only the entrance ticket. After that, the merciless fight with stone began. This refers to the main misconception. The secret was not only in rare marble, but in the union of rare marble and almost inhuman precision of treatment. The master had to understand where the future fabric needed to lie more tightly, where it had to become almost weightless, where it should cast a soft shadow, and where it should let the form beneath come through. This was no simple carving, this was work on the edge. The veil could not look like an added stone crust. It had to seem like a continuation of air, a thin shell accidentally fallen over a face or body. And yet the entire structure remained marble, cold, hard, heavy. The boldest part of this technology was its dependence on natural accident. The required two-layered marble was rare. That means a master could not simply arrive, take any block, and command it to become a veil. He needed stone with the right internal logic. One layer had to yield to delicate treatment. The other had to hold the form and keep the whole construction from collapsing. Without this, the entire effect would turn into ordinary drapery, even if it was beautiful. This refers to the reason why marble veils are so few. They were limited not only by the difficulty of the hand, but also by the rarity of the material itself. So the secret revealed by Monti does not make these sculptures less astonishing. On the contrary, it makes them even harsher and rarer. This was not a magic trick that could be repeated in any workshop. It was the coincidence of several conditions: special stone, exact eye, experienced hand, knowledge of light, understanding of anatomy, and iron patience. If even one element failed, no transparent fabric appeared. This is where the marble veil stops being simply a beautiful illusion. It becomes a document of mastery. The upper layer is turned into fabric. The lower layer holds the body. Between them there is no magic, but calculation, risk, and monstrous delicacy of work. So the main secret sounds simple only on paper. In reality, it was almost a sentence passed on the master. Find the rare stone, do not ruin the upper layer, preserve the lower one, deceive the viewer's eye, and do all of it by hand. That is why marble veils cannot be placed in the same category as ordinary beautiful sculpture. This is not merely elegant work, not a salon whim, and not a spectacular toy for a wealthy patron. Before us is a rare case in which mastery, material, and risk met at one point. The sculptor had not only to see the future image inside the stone, but also to move along the boundary where one extra strike could turn a marvel into a ruined block. The masters of the 18th and 19th centuries worked without digital models, without automatic machines, without the chance to press a button and undo a mistake. Everything depended on the hand. Everything depended on the eye. Everything depended on patience, pushed almost to a severe limit. Millimeter by millimeter, they removed stone so that a heavy surface would begin to look thin, soft, and almost alive. This refers to the main price of such art. In a marble veil, the weakness of the master cannot be hidden, because every mistake immediately comes to the surface. The rarity of these sculptures is explained not only by the fact that they were difficult to make. There are many difficult things in art, but here the difficulty was double. First, the right marble had to be found, the rare material with the necessary internal structure. Then it had to be worked in such a way that the upper layer became the veil, while the lower layer preserved the body, the face, the object, the line, and the form. And all of it had to look not like a technical experiment, but like a natural marvel. That is why there could not be many such works. Not every patron could afford such a risk. Not every stone was suitable, not every sculptor had the right even to attempt it, because the marble veil does not tolerate the middle ground. It either looks like thin fabric, or it becomes a heavy stone mistake. Here no one can hide behind a beautiful pose, a rich composition, or a famous name. The veil itself exposes the level of the master. This refers to the reason why only individual examples have reached us, not whole halls of identical marvels. And that is the hard truth. Marble veils astonish not because the viewer understands nothing about technique. They astonish because even after the explanation, the secret remains almost unbelievable. Yes, there was special stone. Yes, there was an upper layer. Yes, there was different density. But there still remains the human hand that had to pass over this material without the right to weakness. The explanation does not destroy the marvel, it makes it even heavier. When one looks at such works, it becomes clear. This was not a mass technology, not a craft standard, and not a fashion that could be quickly repeated. This was a one-of-a-kind victory over material. Stone did not truly become fabric, but it was treated so precisely that the eye admitted defeat. And in that defeat of the eye lies the entire power of these sculptures. This refers to the final meaning of the whole story. The marble veil proves that sometimes art is stronger than the obvious. Corradini, Sammartino, and Monti worked at different moments, but they all did one main thing. They showed that marble could be not only the body of a statue, but also deception, shell, transparent barrier, almost breath on the surface of stone. Their works still inspire admiration, not because of one beautiful legend, but because of the rare union of precision, material, and audacity. This is the case where mastery is seen, not in a loud gesture, but in the thinnest boundary between dense stone and the illusion of fabric. That is why the small number of such sculptures is not strange, but natural. They are few because they required too much at once. Rare marble, flawless calculation, years of schooling, iron patience, and a hand that would not tremble. And if ordinary sculpture brings stone to life, then the marble veil does something more dangerous. It forces stone to pretend to be what it cannot be. That is why these works still look like a challenge thrown at time, material, and common sense. And now the question is no longer only about marble. The real question is this: how many forgotten technologies, strange methods, and uncomfortable facts are still lying right in front of us, while we simply pass by because we are used to believing simple explanations? The marble veil is not just beauty, it is a challenge. It is stone forced to look thinner than fabric. It is the work of masters who had no right to make a mistake, but had something that is becoming rarer today: patience, precision, and real power over material. If this episode made you question the familiar version of the past, even for a moment, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this, without softened edges and convenient explanations. And be sure to click the bell so you do not miss the next episode. Because the next topics will make you look at familiar history with completely different eyes.